Chapter 25. Jeserac walked in silent wonder through the streets of a diaspora he had never seen. So different was it, indeed, from the city in which he had passed all his lives that he would never have recognized it. Yet he knew that it was diaspora, though how he knew, he did not pause to ask. The streets were narrow, the buildings lower, and the park was gone. Or rather, it did not yet exist. This was the diaspora before the change, the diaspora that had been opened to the world and to the universe. The sky above the city was pale blue and flecked with raveled wisps of cloud, slowly twisting and turning in the winds that blew across the face of this younger earth. Passing through and beyond the clouds were more substantial voyagers of the sky. Miles above the city, lacing the heavens with their silent tracery, the ships that linked diaspora with the outer world came and went upon their business. Jeserac stared for a long time at the mystery and wonder of the open sky, and for a moment, fear brushed against his soul. He felt naked and unprotected, conscious that this peaceful blue dome above his head was no more than the thinnest of shells, that beyond it lay space, with all its mystery and menace. The fear was not strong enough to paralyze his will. In part of his mind, Jeserac knew that this whole experience was a dream, and a dream could not harm him. He would drift through it, savoring all that it brought to him, until he woke once more in the city that he knew. He was walking into the heart of diaspora, toward the point where in his own age stood the tomb of Yarlin Zay. There was no tomb here, in this ancient city. Only a low circular building, with many arched doorways leading into it. By one of those doorways, a man was waiting for him. Jeserac should have been overcome with astonishment, but nothing could surprise him now. Somehow, it seemed right and natural that he should now be face to face with the man who had built diaspora. "You recognize me, I imagine," said Yarlin Zay. "Of course. I have seen your statue 1,000 times. You are Yarlin Zay, and this is diaspora as it was 1,000,000,000 years ago. I know I am dreaming, and that neither of us is really here. Then you need not be alarmed at anything that happens. So follow me, and remember that nothing can harm you, since whenever you wish, you can wake up in diaspora, in your own age." Obediently, Jeserac followed Yarlin Zay into the building, his mind a receptive, uncritical sponge. Some memory, or echo of a memory, warned him of what was going to happen next, and he knew that once he would have shrunk from it in horror. Now, however, he felt no fear. Not only did he feel protected by the knowledge that this experience was not real, but the presence of Yarlin Zay seemed a talisman against any dangers that might confront him. There were few people drifting down the glideways that led into the depths of the building, and they had no other company when presently they stood in silence behind the long, streamlined cylinder. And they had no other company when presently they stood in silence beside the long, streamlined cylinder which, Jeserac knew, could carry him out of the city on a journey that would have once shattered his mind. When his guide pointed to the open door, he paused for no more than a moment on the threshold, and then was through. "You see," said Yarlin Zay with a smile. "Now relax, and remember that you are safe, that nothing can touch you." Jeserac believed him. He felt only the faintest tremor of apprehension as the tunnel entrance slid silently toward him, and the machine in which he was traveling began to gain speed as it hurtled through the depths of the earth. Whatever fears he might have had were forgotten in his eagerness to talk with this almost mythical figure from the past. "Does it not seem strange to you," began Yarlin Zay, "that though the skies are open to us, we have tried to bury ourselves in the earth? It is the beginning of the sickness whose ending you have seen in your age. Humanity is trying to hide. It is frightened of what lies out there in space, and soon it would have closed all the doors that lead into the universe. But I saw spaceships in the sky above Diaspar, said Jeserac. You will not see them much longer. We have lost contact with the stars, and soon even the planets will be deserted. It took us millions of years to make the outward journey, but only centuries to come home again. And in a little while, we will have abandoned almost all of Earth itself. Why did you do it? Asked Jeserac. He knew the answer, yet somehow felt impelled to ask the question. We needed a shelter to protect us from two fears, fear of death and fear of space. We were a sick people and wanted no further part in the universe, so we pretended that it did not exist. We had seen chaos raging through the stars and yearned for peace and stability. Therefore, Diaspar had to be closed, so that nothing new could ever enter it. We designed the city that you know, and invented a false past to conceal our cowardice. Oh, we were not the first to do that, but we were the first to do it so thoroughly. And we redesigned the human spirit, robbing it of ambition and the fiercer passions, so that it would be contented with the world it now possessed. It took 1,000 years to build the city and all its machines. As each of us completed his task, his mind was washed clean of its memories. The carefully planned pattern of false ones was implanted, and his identity was stored in the city's circuits until the time came to call it forth again. So at last, there came a day when there was not a single man alive in Diaspar. There was only the central computer, obeying the orders which we had fed into it, and controlling the memory banks in which we were sleeping. There was no one who had any contact with the past, and so at this point, history began. Then, one by one, in a predetermined sequence, we were called out of the memory circuits and given flesh again, like a machine that had just been built and now was set operating for the first time. Diaspar began to carry out the duties for which it had been designed. Yet, some of us had doubts even from the beginning. Eternity was a long time. We recognized the risks involved in leaving no outlet and trying to seal ourselves completely from the universe. We could not defy the wishes of our culture, so we worked in secret, making the modifications we thought necessary. The uniques were our invention. They would appear at long intervals and would, if circumstances allowed them, discover if there was anything beyond Diaspar that was worth the effort of contacting. We never imagined that it would take so long for one of them to succeed, nor did we imagine that its success would be so great. Despite that suspension of the critical faculties which is the very essence of a dream, Jeserac wondered fleetingly how Yarlan Zay could speak with such knowledge of things that happened 1 billion years after his time. It was very confusing. He did not know where in time or space he was. The journey was coming to an end. The walls of the tunnel no longer flashed past him at such breakneck speed. Yarlan Zay began to speak with an urgency and an authority which he had not shown before. The past is over. We did our work, for better or for ill, and that is finished with. When you were created, Jeserac, you were given that fear of the outer world, and that compulsion to stay within the city, that you share with everyone else in Diaspar. You know now that that fear was groundless, that it was artificially imposed on you. I, Yarlan Zay, who gave it to you, now release you from its bondage. Do you understand? With those last words, the voice of Yarlan Zay became louder and louder until it seemed to reverberate through all of space. The subterranean carrier in which he was speeding blurred and trembled around Jeserac, as if his dream was coming to an end. Yet, as the vision faded, he could still hear that imperious voice thundering into his brain. You are no longer afraid, Jeserac. You are no longer Afraid! He struggled up toward wakefulness, as a diver climbs from the ocean depths back to the surface of the sea. Jarl Zay had vanished, but there was a strange interregnum when voices which he knew but could not recognize talked to him encouragingly, and he felt himself supported by friendly hands. Then, like a swift dawn, reality came flooding back. He opened his eyes and saw Alvin and Hilvar and Drain standing anxiously beside him. But he paid no heed to them. His mind was too filled with the wonder that now lay spread before him. The panorama of forests and rivers, and the blue vaults of the open sky. He was in Lys, and he was not afraid. No one disturbed him, as the timeless moment imprinted itself forever on his mind. At last, when he had satisfied himself that this indeed was real, he turned to his companions. "Thank you, Drain," he said. "I never believed you would succeed." The psychologist, looking very pleased with himself, was making delicate adjustments to a small machine that hung in the air beside him. "You gave us some anxious moments," he admitted. "Once or twice you started to ask questions that couldn't be answered logically, and I was afraid I would have to break the sequence. Suppose Jarl Zay had not convinced me. What would you have done then? We would have kept you unconscious and taken you back to Diaspar, where you could have waked up naturally, without ever knowing that you've been to Lys. And that image of Jarl Zay you fed into my mind, how much of what he said was the truth?" "Most of it, I believe. I was much more anxious that my little saga should be convincing, rather than historically accurate. But Calitrax has examined it and can find no errors. It is certainly consistent with all that we know about Jarl Zay and the origins of Diaspar." "So now we can really open the city," said Alvin. "It may take a long time, but eventually we'll be able to neutralize the sphere so that everyone who wishes can leave Diaspar." "It will take a long time," replied Drain dryly. "And don't forget that Lys is hardly large enough to hold several 100 million extra people, if all your people decide to come here. I don't think that's likely, but it's possible." "The problem will solve itself," answered Alvin. "Lys may be tiny, but the world is wide. Why should we let the desert keep it all?" "So, you are still dreaming, Alvin," said Jeserac with a smile. "I was wondering what there was left for you to do." Alvin did not answer. That was a question which had become more and more insistent in his own mind during the past few weeks. He remained lost in thought, falling behind the others as they walked down the hill toward Airlie. Would the centuries that lay ahead of him be one long anticlimax? The answer lay in his own hands. He had discharged his destiny. Now, perhaps he could begin to live.